McCracken. Welcome to Apollo's Watered.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Are you ready for the Fast Five?
I am ready.
Here we go. First question for the Fast Five. Batman or Iron Man?
Oh, Batman for sure.
Why? And they're both billionaires, but why?
Why? I just think the Batman world and aesthetic in mythology is more interesting, personally.
It's much more of a depraved world.
Maybe that speaks to my bent towards the darker kind of minor key of life. But I've always liked Batman over some of the more I don't know, just smiley face superheroes.
He's definitely not that. Now, you are from the Midwest, but you're living on the West Coast. So here we go. Midwest or West Coast?
Oh, man. I'm torn on that because I love both of them for different reasons. So, I can't really commit either way. But I'll say West Coast because that's where I am currently. So you got to love where you are. So,
that's a good answer. That's a nice way of, scooting your family and everybody else that's back in the Midwest. Sorry, but this is where I'm at.
I love the Midwest, though. Gotta say. Okay. No hate for the Midwest at all.
No hate. Well, that's good. That is good. Best 80s movie and why?
Best 80s movie. Probably Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. The first one.
That's the best one, I think.
It's the best one. And it's just a movie that I grew up on as a kid growing up in the 80s.
I love Indiana Jones. I hate the Temple of Doom.
See, I loved that one as a kid, probably because as a 7-year-old, you love the gory kind of, just extreme, like the roller coaster moment in that movie. I loved as a little boy.
See, I think for me, it was because the first one and the third one had more, Judeo-Christian bent.
Yeah.
Maybe
true.
That's why. That's why.
Temple of Doom is just like Hindu paganism.
Yeah. And I was like, no, not legit. Not legit. Let's talk about what's legit. Here we go. The fourth question. So I know that you, and I'm assuming this just because having read your book, you are trained in music in some way, shape, or form. So here we go. I'm going to give you two different composers of movie soundtracks.
Okay.
And you have to choose which one and why. So John Williams or James Horner.
John Williams, for sure. We're just talking about Indiana Jones, so John Williams is on the brain, I guess. But he's probably like the Steven Spielberg of movie, music. He's kind of the iconic movie composer. So got to go with him. Although I did just watch Titanic for the first time in 20 years, which that was James Horner, right? Or no?
Yeah, that was Horner.
And that's of course a unforgettable soundtrack. But
there's so many of them. And there's just so many talented composers, but I love movie soundtracks. So
but can I just put in a word for my favorite movie soundtrack composer is Hans Zimmer, without a doubt.
See, I was gonna put him in there, and I thought he's so good. So Hans Zimmer wins in the end. Here we go. Last question, number 5, and that is this: if you were a restaurant, what restaurant would you be, and why?
Oh wow. I've never been asked that question, but I like it.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we're going to go with the good thing.
It's a hard one for me because I'm a foodie. I love restaurants. If I were a restaurant, man, I don't even know. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is just this restaurant in Maui called Mama's Fish House, which I would choose that only because the location is beautiful. So if I had to be a restaurant, I would want to have a nice view, and that's a good one there in Hawaii, and it's good food too.
Is it like a fast food?
No, it's the opposite. It's kind of like the fanciest restaurant in Maui. So if you go to Maui ever, like you have to go to Mama's Fish House, and you'll get like the most amazing seafood you've ever had, pretty much.
That sounds actually really, really good.
It's very good.
I just want to end the show and look it up. Okay. So you've written a book that I think is pretty amazing, called The Wisdom Pyramid. I've got it right here. You can tell I've read through it and I got notes all over your book. What was the impetus behind this book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a couple things. I would say one is just being someone who works on the internet. I'm a website editor. That's my day job. I work for the Gospel Coalition, and I spend all of my time pretty much in the space of the internet and on social media a lot because of my job. And I think just my experience of being so immersed in this world made me very aware of the bad formation that happens on the internet and the bad things that it can do to your soul, frankly. And I was seeing it in my own soul. The more time I would spend online and on social media, I just felt myself becoming more foolish, like you can kind of sense yourself being dumbed down the more time you're in those spaces. So part of the impetus was just personal. In my own life, I wanted to kind of audit my intakes a little bit and figure out better habits that would be conducive to wisdom. I would say another big impetus was pastoral. So I'm an elder at a local church, and just being responsible for other Christians and their spiritual health and wanting to kind of disciple people well in the digital age. So much of discipleship right now in the 21st century, I think, has a lot to do with our media diets and what constitutes kind of the intakes that are coming into us. And there's so much at our disposal, right? More than ever before, we have voices calling out to us and, watch this, click on this, listen to this. And I just think pastors have to be so kind of in the weeds of those decisions with their people and walking them through like their diets of information, because all of it shapes us, just like food, right? What comes into you shapes you for good or for ill. Your physical diet can either make you healthy or it can make you sick. And the proportions, of junk food versus healthy food, will determine that. And the same is true of our spiritual health. And I've seen it in people's lives, in people who I am walking with pastorally. I've seen their spiritual health just kind of start to decline. And I can point to certain things like they're listening to, some really unhelpful media, podcasts, whatever, like they're on certain websites where their partisan kind of, anger is getting inflamed. And so I think that's a big part of why I wrote this book, is just to, as a local church leader, to help other church leaders just have a toolbox to help in the task of digital discipleship. And then the third one I would say is just as a parent. I'm a dad. This is the first book I've written as a dad, I think. And my kids are small; they're under 3, but this is the world that they're going to be growing up in. And I wanted to write a book that would be something that they could use and I could reference to help them establish from a young age, like diets of wisdom, building their lives around sources that are going to make them wise, rather than flipping the pyramid, which we can talk about, in a little bit, the different levels. But I see so many young people today who, just by virtue of being a digital native and growing up in the age of the smartphone, their dominant source of, quote unquote nutrition, which isn't very nutritious, is what's on their phone. And it's the equivalent of just, feeding your kid Kool-Aid and sugar water and Tootsie Rolls, as their steady diet. Like, it's making them sick. spiritually sick. And if we don't do something about this, the next generation is going to be so spiritually sick. So I wrote this book for myself, for the people in my church, and then for my kids and their generation.
What made you choose the pyramid idea?
So yeah, that the origin of that was actually a conference talk I was giving in 2017, I think. And I was asked to speak at this conference on the topic of being a wise Christian in a post-truth age, and kind of this fake news, like epistemological crisis that we're in. How do we live with joy and truth as Christians? And as I was putting together my talk, it was like a TED talk, so I only had like 10 minutes. I was like, man, there's so much I could say, but like, what would be a good visual that would capture in a nutshell, like what my argument is going to be, which was essentially that the inputs that feed us are a huge part of this. So I came up with I was like, what if I took the food pyramid and just kind of adapted it for our knowledge diet and our information diet? And so I just kind of sketched it out on a napkin and thought, if I were to create a wisdom pyramid with the healthiest things at the bottom and the junk food at the top, what would that look like? And so I sketched it out. I had a graphic designer friend make it look pretty, like design it in a way that would be appropriate for a conference talk. And then it was on the screen when I gave my talk, and it was the thing that really stuck from that talk. I don't think people remembered what I said, but like people got out their cell phones and were taking pictures of the wisdom pyramid on the screen. And ironically, it kind of went viral on social media that week. And then ever since, it's just been this thing that people keep coming back to. And over the years, people were like, man, that wisdom pyramid graphic is so helpful. And so when it came time for me to think about my next book idea, that was the wisdom pyramid was really the thing that I kept like coming back to. Like, what if I just took this graphic and like dug a little deeper into each level of it and made it into a book? So that's how it came to be.
So let's talk then about these levels, because it's really astounding to me that you did this so quickly as you're putting together a TED Talk, and you have so much that's really jammed in this. I remember walking through it, kind of looking through your table of contents, saying, okay, well, what are the layers? What are the levels? How did he discern which ones to do? And we've got the Bible, church, nature, books, beauty, the internet, and social media. So I understand the Bible, and I want to hit each one just a brief moment. Yeah. But talk about why you ordered it the way that you did.
Yeah, that's a question that I get a lot, and it's fun to talk about because there is a rhyme and a reason to it. I essentially as I think about wisdom and where we get wisdom as a Christian, we believe it's from God, right? True wisdom is from above. It's God-given. He is the embodiment of wisdom and the source of all wisdom. And so I wanted to structure the pyramid in a way that it went from the most kind of proximate to God at the bottom, the closest to the source of, the Bible is his direct speech. So you can't get any better in terms of like proximity to true wisdom with a capital W than the Bible. And then going up from the Bible, it kind of is a little bit more removed from God in terms of proximity. So I would argue that the church is the next closest proximity we have to God, because it's the Holy Spirit. It's the presence of God among his people. It's the body of Christ. There's a tangible sense of the presence of, Christ in the midst of us. And it's just God's chosen, instrument for his mission to advance in the world. So the church, and then nature is the one where people often have questions about, like, why is nature like the third most important source of wisdom? But this is where the proximity to God thing is my argument, because nature is proximate to God because it's God's creation. It's his handiwork. There's no intermediary between God and nature. This is what he made. It's his handiwork. So and scripture itself tells us to look to nature, to gain wisdom, to learn about God. The heavens declare the glory of God, Psalm 19. Romans 1, Paul talks about, there's things we can know about, God and his design just by looking around us. So it's the whole idea of general revelation. So that's why why I put it so foundational, because it's got proximity to God by virtue of being what he made. And then books is the next one up. And so this is where you start getting into like man-made things, which introduces fallibility and a little bit more of kind of a grain of salt you have to take. There can be wisdom because by common grace, God created, humans are his image bearers. So we have the capacity to write books that contain truth and wisdom and whatnot. But there's also obviously potential for error that we have to be cautious about. So that's why books, and then beauty, being kind of the arts and like human creations, again, great potential for containing wisdom for us, nutrition for our wisdom diet, but also, and there's potential for error. So, and then at the very top is where I put social media and the internet. And that's like half the time that's not even human made, right? It's algorithms, it's machines that are like thinking for us and predicting what kind of content we want. And so you can't get more further removed from God than machines,
than social media,
than social media, than Twitter. So there you go.
I really enjoyed the classification, and I wanted to know why you delineated it the way that you did. But of course, anyone who's been in church for any period of time, we have the Bible at the foundation of what we do, hopefully, because everything else springs from that. And then when you took the trajectory of the church, I wondered, wow, that's slightly different than what I expected, but not too much. You're right, though. Nature, I understood, because there was a book written a few years ago called Spiritual Pathways, where they talk about how the word of God is the primary mechanism, but people connect with God through a variety of different ways, like the heavens declare the glory of God, walking in nature, through music, through all of these different little ways. I particularly like that you did talk about books, because my mentor told me years ago that I'll be no different than I am now, depending on three things: the people, the choices you make, the people you know, and the books you read. And I think that's something that in large respect has been lost by our current generation. I mean, yes, there are those pockets that are upholding that, I think, tradition. Yeah. But you did that well. And what I really, though, liked is your conversation about beauty. One of your friends at the Gospel Coalition, Jeremy Treat, in his book, writes about beauty. And we had him as a guest on the show. Oh, cool. And we talked about beauty because that's something that most evangelicals don't consider part of their Christian walk per se.
Sadly, yeah.
But yet you talked about art. You wrote about music, which was really refreshing to me. I was trained as a musician. So I thought, where do we see this? Because I've seen so many pastors basically just kick the idea of beauty and beauty, music, art to the curb. It doesn't have anything to do with the Christian life. Yeah. Why was that so important for you to put that into this book?
I wish it weren't the second from the top level, because people misinterpret that as being less important than it is. It really is crucial. I think beauty is a crucial part of our wisdom diet. And anyone who knows me and my writing, I'm an arts and culture critic. That's the majority of what I write about for the Gospel Coalition. So I'm a huge advocate for Christians being more engaged in that area. But you're right, it's de-emphasized, especially in Protestant Christianity. I think there's a sense of beauty is superfluous. It's a little bit kind of like non-utilitarian, like how does it advance the mission? We're not clear about that. There isn't like a clear ROI, to spend a lot of money on a beautiful building that's more than just efficient and has utility. We don't, sadly, Protestants aren't spending a lot of money on beauty in their churches. But I think it's so important. And there's so much you could say just theologically, but I mean, one of the big things I come back to is just that our God is a non-utilitarian creator of beauty. Like, he made a world that all you have to do is look around you in nature, which is his artwork, his beauty. And you can see clearly that he made the world more beautiful than it needed to be, right? Did we really need to have 40,000 species of hummingbirds, like each of them beautifully different, each of them crafted to be matched with a certain orchid? There's hummingbirds that exist in the world that literally only feed off of one plant that also exists only for this hummingbird. Like, if you look at the world around you, if you taste, chocolate or coffee, you can't help but just bear witness to the fact that, God cares about beauty. He didn't just make the world to be this just boring place where we don't have senses to enjoy things, right? He made us as sensory creatures. And one of my favorite verses in the Psalms is Psalm 34:8, taste and see that the Lord is good, right? We don't just know cerebrally that God is good. We taste it with our senses, like we see it. We listen to it. We hear God's goodness when we hear a Bach symphony or, some beautiful chord progression. We see God's goodness when we look at a sunset. Like, last night I was driving down the 57 freeway at sunset with my 3-year-old son, and we had this whole sweet conversation about, like, daddy, why did God create sunsets? And I was like, because he loves us, because he's good, like, because he wanted to bless us every day with this just mysterious beauty of pink and purple and blue skies. So, I mean, I think with beauty, it has to be important to us because it's clearly important to God, right? And even the Bible, God's chosen, like, revelation to us is full of beauty. God didn't choose to reveal himself to us with a, like, list of 50,000 bullet points of, like, here are 50,000, like, propositions that I want you to remember. Instead, he revealed himself in a story with heroes and villains and conflict and tension and light and dark and just all the forms of beauty, right? I mean, so much of the Old Testament is poetry. Yeah. Jesus himself, when he taught, he didn't speak only in logical syllogisms. He spoke in these parables and told these stories and used metaphor and imagery. So if the Bible itself is a beautiful document that invokes the arts and beauty, and that's what God decided, that's how he wanted to reveal himself, then I think it needs to be an important part of our lives as well. And I think, just practically in the Christian life, I think beauty is so important for worship, for slowing us down enough to appreciate God and again to taste and see his goodness, to savor it. And sometimes we rush through life in this utilitarian mode, and it works against our worship, because worship is so much about having space to be grateful and to be still and know that he is God and to praise him for who he is. And for me, the arts and beauty do that. Like, when I sit still long enough to listen to a beautiful piece of music or watch a beautifully made film or, go to an art gallery, like, it's all an opportunity for me to ultimately worship God for the extravagance of this world that he created and the majesty of what his image bearers have the capacity to come up with, right? There's a way that we can worship God through what artists make not by worshiping the artist, right? That's just kind of idolatry, but worshiping God because, wow, like you created Bach, this genius. You created Handel, these Beethoven, like you created these geniuses who had the capacity to put together, notes and chords and movements in such majestic ways. You created Vincent van Gogh to be able to look at your creation, to look at the stars, and to paint Starry Night in a way that leads us to think differently about the stars and the starry night. So I could go on and on, but I mean, beauty is so foundational in the Christian life, and it's very tied to Sabbath. And I think a lot of the same reasons why Protestants really struggle to maintain, Sabbath and actually take a break from time to time. That's a lot of the same reasons why they struggle to appreciate beauty, because beauty and Sabbath go hand in hand, because they both kind of require us to appreciate the superfluous kind of abundance of God. God is not a God of scarcity. God is a God of abundance. And so if that's true, if that's who he is, then we should be able to slow down and do some things every now and then that are just playful and fun and extravagant and not just utilitarian. And whether that's eating chocolate or going to a play or sitting in front of a, Mark Rothko painting at a museum for an hour and just looking at the painting, like it could be a lot of things, but I think it's so important to make space in our lives for that.
So many people that I've interacted with, the concept of beauty is definitely there. They're not familiar with Rothko. They're not necessarily familiar or desirous to listen to Handel.
Yeah.
But yet we also know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There is this idea that we do, though, as humans, recognize and crave beauty. If I remember correctly, Jeremy, when he had been on the show, he had written in his book about a couple, and I can't remember if it was he and his wife when they were younger and perhaps in school, and they were very limited financially, and she had bought flowers and spent some money that really felt that that was extra in his mind. But she said, it's not only food that we need, it's also beauty. We do need beauty in our lives. And I think of Ecclesiastes. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Beauty is such an intrinsic part of who we are as God's image bearers. But where does that fit? If you're talking to a pastor who seems like he's just trying to keep things together, how does he take this concept of beauty and play that out within the idea of sanctification in the Christian life? So how does that fit together?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like opportunities to incorporate beauty and appreciation of beauty into discipleship and sanctification. I mean, one that comes to mind, to go back to what I was saying about like the way that beauty and Sabbath are kind of concepts that are related. To me, one of the ways we go off track in our spiritual lives is by having a higher estimation of ourselves, right, than we should. And sometimes that takes the shape of thinking that we're more important, that the world will not function if we ever press pause or stop. So the kind of overworking mentality of like hustling all the time, just do. It's a prideful posture, because implicit in that is that, without you functioning full throttle all the time, that things will fall apart and the world will cease to function. I think it's actually a way to cultivate humility and kind of push back our pride to be able to say, I'm going to rest, I'm going to take a Sabbath, or when it comes to beauty, to say, I'm going to stop being productive for a few hours and I'm just going to receive something in the form of beauty or art. I'm going to sit still and rest in the abundance of who God is. as manifested in, you know, a beautiful piece of music or a concert or a movie or whatever. So I think there's a lot that you can walk people through in terms of like, you know, pride and humility and being okay being, you know, not functioning so productively utilitarian all the time. And it's, so there's a whole like theology of Sabbath that I think you could use when you're talking about beauty. There's a great little book by a Catholic theologian, Joseph Pieper, called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And he really goes into like a theology of leisure and rest and kind of makes a lot of connections to art and beauty. And that was a book that I drew from a lot as I wrote the chapter on beauty in the book.
I find that very fascinating because we had Timothy Tennant on the show, president of Asbury, and he had written a book called For the Body, developing a theology of the body, because for many of us, we have become kind of modern Gnostics. Yeah. And in that, though, he draws a lot on Catholic theology. And I find it very fascinating that as Protestants, there's been this pendulum away from the excesses that we're seeing within Catholicism, which is why I think you see the utilitarian concept within church buildings, the Quakers, the Shakers, the Puritans. I mean, very, very simple buildings, because we're so afraid of going too far. Yeah. Yet there's the corrective. You know, there's the pendulum always swings too far as an overcorrective based on the abuses and the excesses of that we've seen in previous generations. Yeah. Why do you think it is, number one, so hard for Protestants to wrap their brains around this? Number one. And number two, how do we really help people see this as not just a corrective, but really, and not just essential, because it's not salvific per se. Yeah. Depending on how you want to outline. I mean, because the cross is beautiful. You could talk about that and getting the who Christ is and just our desire for that. But how do you help someone who is, again, just trying to understand how to get, how to help someone see Jesus in the middle of all this? Because it can be a great evangelistic tool. Yeah, for sure. To show that they can see the true beauty and really see that through Christ. But go ahead and elaborate on those a little bit. Yeah, man, there's a lot there. Boom. Well, that's what this show is for, Brett. Okay. Well, let me just go for it and see where I go. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of why Protestants struggle with it, I think you're right. There's very much a reaction against Catholicism. And I think so much of beauty and art in Catholicism tended to be bound up within the church itself and kind of the accoutrements and the extravagance of church buildings. And I mean, that was what indulgences in the Reformation funded, right? It's a building project. It was a building project. So I can see why Protestants are a little bit wary of, extravagant building projects. But I think Protestants need to remember that beauty, of course, if a beautiful church is the end, if it's kind of the end unto itself, then that's a problem, right? But beautiful churches, and you go back to the medieval period and like these great cathedrals that took centuries to build, ultimately they were being built by generations of Christians who never lived to see the finished product for the glory of God, right? If we think about beauty as something that we care about because it bears witness and points to God in all of his splendor and his majesty, which the most beautiful man-made creation can only begin to barely approximate, then I think that's the frame of mind that we have to have when we go about beauty. It's not about bringing glory to us, to our church, to the church. It's about glorifying God. So when Handel makes the Messiah, right, this huge sprawling oratorio, like it's for God's glory. The greatest like Christian art throughout history, I think, is great because it was made out of this pure, glorify God through something excellent and just over the top beautiful.
So I think that that's one shift. We could just think about this in terms of like, it's about God. It's our attempt to just show the world that God is worth it, right? When I went to Barcelona a few years ago, I went to La Sagrada Familia, which is this cathedral that this famous Spanish architect Gaudi, he designed it back in the 1800s, and they started building it in the late 1800s. I want to say like 1885 or something. They started building it, and it's still under construction, right? 150 or whatever years later, they're still not done with it. And every year they make a little bit more progress. But when I went to see it, it was already this stunning piece of architecture that made me just tremble before the majesty of God when I was in this cathedral. And I can't imagine what it's going to be like when it's done. They think it might be done in like 2026 or 2027. We'll see. But I think there's a real potential for beauty to be evangelistic. If we can show a world, the world is increasingly getting used to culture that's very disposable, right? We forget about, the hit song that was on the charts last week. We've already forgotten, right? The movie that won all the awards last year, like who can remember this year? Like the arts and culture are cycling through at such a fast pace. Even the things that we consider beautiful now, like we're going to forget. So if Christians can be the ones that are advocating for this jaw-dropping beauty that really like stops people in their tracks and gets them to ask questions like, why do Christians care so much about making beautiful things? And we answer, because God is beautiful and glorious and worth it. And because we're trying to give a picture now of the splendor of heaven, right? That's the point of us. That's the point of the church right now, is to give the world a picture of the future, of eternity in the now, to bring a little bit of the order of heaven into the chaos of this world now. And beauty and beautiful things can be a great part of that. It can be a picture to the world of heaven. That's what the great medieval cathedrals were in their time. In the medieval era, like sickness and war and like the world was a total mess, but you would come into these cathedrals and it was this little like enclave of heaven on earth that gave you a sense of the eschatological reality of the church. And I think we have to recover that. We have to be the people making the best art and the best beauty that actually gives people pictures of heaven on earth. So I could go on and on. One other thing I would say is there are Protestants in our own tradition that we can look to. The Puritans, Jonathan Edwards talked a lot about beauty. So it's not as if all Protestants, de-emphasized beauty. I think if you look within our own tradition, there are plenty of people who thought a lot about the role of beauty. And so I drew from Jonathan Edwards quite a bit when I was researching and writing the beauty chapter. And he just has some really beautiful lyrical passages describing God's attributes through the beautiful, tangible things that he could see and taste and touch in the world. All of it, is an opportunity to glorify God. So we can learn from that.
You mentioned how the internet has created, and I want to make sure I get your term. So you said a culture of disposability.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, you mentioned a thing called perpetual presentism. Is that correct? Do I have that terminology right?
Yeah, I forget exactly, but yeah, presentism and perceptual presentism. Yeah.
Or perceptual presentism. Maybe that's what it is. Describe what that is, because I think people, in talking about a wisdom diet and those who are using their phones all the time, there is this idea of being caught up. This idea that I have to know what's going on in the moment. And then after you talk about that, I do want to go back to what you said earlier about rest and Sabbath, changing that rhythm. But let's talk about the perpetual presentism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think our primary mode of interacting with the world is through the now, right? What's on our feed right now. And we live in this mode of scrolling through constantly. And so it's just, everything is about the now. What article am I clicking on now? What video am I clicking on? What's the news headline? What's trending? What's buzzworthy? And we never remember, right? I don't remember what was the like viral thing yesterday, let alone last week or a year ago. So we struggle to remember. The more we live in this perceptual presentism, meaning everything that comes into our perception is the now, the more our capacity for deep memory is eroded. So the more and you see this, right, in our culture. Like sometimes I scratch my head at the debates that are happening in our society, because I'm like, we had this debate 50 years ago or like 100 years ago. Like there's so many resources in the past that we can draw from that we're just ignorant of because we're ignorant of history. And I think wisdom requires us to have a bigger picture where we build on the foundations that have come before us, and we draw from the resources of the past, and we recognize that what's happening now is not the be all end all. We need to have a bigger view. We need to think about the past and the future, and not just the now. And yet that's the dominant like paradigm of the smartphone age. It's designed to be a disposable experience because it's more money for the social media companies, for YouTube, to get us kind of addicted to this ephemeral cycle, right? Where once we're done watching one thing on Netflix, before the credits even roll, there's a suggestion for what to watch next. They want to keep you moving on. They don't want you to linger on things. They don't want you to like turn off a show and sit there and think about it. Even though that would be good for your wisdom, is if after we watched something or read an article on the internet, if we actually turned everything off and just stared at a blank wall and pondered what we just read or watched. But we don't do that, right? We move on to the next thing. We click on the next link. We keep scrolling through our feeds, and that's killing us. That is killing our wisdom. If I could point to one thing that is destroying wisdom, it's the fact that we are filling every spare moment in our lives with more content, to the point that there's literally no space left in our lives to actually think about things and to ponder and to synthesize what we've encountered. So I think I say in the book at one point, like staring at a blank wall is like the most productive thing you can do in the digital age, because it's actually giving your soul some space to make connections and to process in the same way that, physical eating, right? If you're eating constantly all day, every day, you never give your body any time to digest and to kind of synthesize the nutrients, you're going to get sick. You're not going to be physically healthy. And the same is true of our spiritual health. If we're binging on content 24/7 and we never let our mind breathe and rest and process, it's not going to be good. Even the most nutritious content, we might be reading, really intelligent articles and watching documentaries and award-winning films, but it's still not going to be good for you if you never pause enough to let it percolate and kind of synthesize a little bit.
There was a sermon illustration I remember discovering online years ago. I wish I could remember the source, but it was of a Christian who talked about how he memorized verses as he was walking, as he was getting dressed in the morning. He was reciting Greek words, and he was doing all this stuff. And again, this is probably 100, 200 years ago. And someone just responded to him. They said, "Brother, when do you think?"
Yeah.
And I think that more people are calling for that, because I look scripturally and I see there is a discipline of remembrance, as we go through the Old Testament, because the Israelites forgot that all the time. Yeah. And they would always forget about what God had done. And I think you're right. We are in this perceptual presentism, and then we forget who God is. Have you, after having read your book, it makes me, I picked up another book right after yours called Restless Devices. Have you read that? Felicia Wu Song. It's IVP 2021.
I haven't, but I like the sound of it.
It's fantastic. And in the book, she cites James K.A. Smith as creating a counter liturgy. And it seems that's what you're talking about. Liturgy means the work of the people. And we have this way of doing things. But when you're talking about rest, that to me is a pushback against the culture and what it demands.
Yeah.
And it's that counter liturgy saying, no, I'm going to take this time to discipline myself. She talks about real practical ways. And I think she's citing Andy Crouch in the middle of all this, put your device is like a child, put it to bed before you go to bed, and you get up before your child does. Let your table be a place of sacred conversation and your bedroom to be a place of sacred rest. And that's why after reading your book and seeing that one right there, it was handed ball and glove, just such a perfect way of looking at that. But what do you say to those who don't see this as a problem? There are, and that's usually more with younger people, those who are, as you said, digital natives, where this is simply part and parcel of their world. How do you hope to use, or how do you hope God uses this book to help them to be, I don't know if weaned off is the wrong term, weaned off is the right term, or that it would have its proper place. And that's, by the way, that's one of the things I love about this. It's not a legalistic approach. It's saying, no, it's okay, provided it has its right place.
For sure.
But how do you help these digital natives see that this is such a pressing issue?
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. Like the internet and social media are on the wisdom pyramid, right? I could have left it off completely and suggested that
we all become Amish.
Yeah, in order to be wise, you all have to become Amish, throw away your technology.
Yeah,
I am not advocating that. I'm not a Amish. I'm not a Mennonite, not a Luddite. So yeah, I think that it is about being in the proper place. It's about the proper proportions of things. And one of the key things, I think, with any habit that might be idolatrous is, can you live without it? Like, are you physically capable of reducing the amount of time that you spend with it? So that would be one like initial question I would raise with the Gen Z, like digital native who like pushes back and says like, this isn't a problem. Like you're overreacting. I would just ask them, okay, well, can you go a day without your phone? Can you go an hour without your phone? Like, can you put it in another room and just sit still with your own thoughts for an hour? Like, and you'd be surprised how hard that is, right? To even do that. And that's like the definition of an addiction, right? It's the same thing with alcohol. Like if you can't go a day without a drink, you are addicted. You are an alcoholic. Like but the thing with alcohol is like, if you can learn to do it in moderation, if you can have a drink every now and then, and it doesn't lead to this, unhealthy addictive behavior, then it can be a wonderful thing. And I would argue the same is true of your phone and technology. It can be a great thing if we're able to put it away at times and live without it and create space in our lives to just be unmediated from time to time. And it's that inability to be unmediated for even 5 minutes that I really worry about. Like if anything keeps me up at night, it's that inability. Like if you look around at a coffee shop when you're like in line at Starbucks, everyone is on their phone, right? In the 3 minutes of open space that people have to wait for their coffee, people literally cannot not look at their phone. No one anymore just stands there in thought, looking around, let alone engaging in conversation with another human. Everyone pulls out their phone and starts scrolling. Like when you're in the car, like just start paying attention to your habits when you're driving in the car. and you're at a stoplight, what do you do instinctively these days? If you're at a stoplight, you do something on your phone for like literally the 30 seconds that you have at a stoplight. And that's scary, right? That we are so conditioned to fill every gap in our lives with some sort of experience on our device that we can't wean ourselves off of that. So I would just start there with young people. Like, can you go without your device for a little bit of time? I'm not saying throw it away. I'm not saying it's, something that you should try to live without completely, but can you live without it for any amount of time? If you can't, that is the definition of an addictive, idol in your life. And so that right there is the problem that we're dealing with.
I think a lot of young people actually do see that. I see that with my own children. And sometimes I'm not sure if it's the children that have more of a problem or the adults, because adults have that issue. And
for sure. Yeah.
It's been our issue. And that's why I think you're seeing many more people talk about it. And then social media with documentaries such as the Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
Which to me is very ironic that it's actually on Netflix. Just
right.
The whole,
right.
which is still playing with the same type of algorithms.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think what shocks me are so many of these tech founding fathers that have come out and have noted the addictive nature of this. And yet it doesn't stop. Even the ones who see it, they're like, well, there's not anything we can do. Yeah. And so that's why I think it's so important what a book like yours, because churches need to be able to talk about these things with their people, because we're not to be ruled by anything.
Yeah.
And I think we are. And that's why I think so many people need to put into place some of these. I mean, first to convince them that it is a wisdom idea. And that's what I love about how you put it in there, because wisdom is something that we know there's knowledge. Yeah. There's so much knowledge. We can Google anything. But wisdom is what we're looking for among the different generations. Yeah. So what kind of pushback, though, have you received from your book? What have been the criticisms?
There haven't been like any consistent criticisms. There's been like quibbles with different chapters, and sometimes people have issues with the ordering of putting books above beauty or nature above whatever. Trying to think if there's been any like major, one interesting criticism that I actually respect and agree with is the book is all about intakes in terms of what forms us to be wise. But what about like outputs? Like what about our work and vocation and what we create with our hands? And to that I say, yes, absolutely. Like wisdom is more than just having a good diet of intakes. It also involves how you live and the actions you take and the practices you do in life, in a more output sort of way. It's just that this book, the scope of it was focused on with the food pyramid idea. It was more about what feeds you. But I suppose there could be a sequel or some other book about like practices in terms of what you do beyond just reading the right things or like watching the right things. So.
Do you find with the book, you put these parameters in place? I mean, you talk about some of the practices that you've done or practices you recommend. And I found myself feeling convicted, going, okay, can I do that? Can I do that? And then the next day, I'm doing the opposite of what you said, where you talk about picking up your phone for intentional reasons. Yeah. Not just to scroll. And I'm like, but I need to know the score of the game. That's an intentional thing.
There you go. Yeah.
But where you say here, five habits, I'm going to read this. Oh, I just lost the page, but 5 habits for cultivating wisdom online. 1, you said, go with a purpose. Don't just surf. 2, quality over quantity. 3, slow down. 4, diversify your exposure. And 5, share what's good. And you said, don't abandon, redeem. Yeah. So elaborate on these, because I think people are saying, okay, I got all this stuff. I know that we need to be more discerning, but some people just need a guide, a practice, if you will? What are the steps of this performative counter liturgy that I am trying to enact in my life? Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment. 5 habits for cultivating wisdom online. Go with a purpose, don't just surf. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what we were just talking about with the social algorithm and the way that like the social media companies are really counting on us being passive consumers. Like they want to be the guides of our media experience. They are more than happy to recommend watch this next or click on this next, because that they know that will keep us hooked and keep us on the platform. So when we're passive in our time on the internet, it's just a bad thing because you're totally at the mercy of the algorithm. You're literally just letting yourself be led down whatever path of content they want you to go down. And this is the mode, the passive mode is where we end up, we go online for one thing and we end up staying online for 2 hours. And by the end of it, we're like, how did I get here? Like, how did I wind up on this website? Like, I don't know. Like we've all had those moments of like,
why am I watching squirrels skiing?
Why am I watching squirrels skiing? Oh man, YouTube is the rabbit hole for sure.
It is, but I remember walking into my living room and my brother-in-law and my son, and that's what they're watching on YouTube. And I went, how in the world did you get to this place?
Yeah. And I don't want to knock squirrel skiing videos because there is a place for leisure and beauty in your wisdom pyramid.
I don't know if those are leisure or wisdom.
So I don't want to fully knock those, but yeah, I mean, the passive versus intentional thing is probably like the biggest piece of advice I would give in terms of wisdom online. Just like go with a plan. Go, if you're going to use the internet, like have 1 or 2 or 3 specific things you want to do. Like I need to buy this on Amazon. I need to go read, that article on the New York Times that I've been meaning to read. I need to go, whatever, write an email, but then like go off. Like the minute you're done with those things, like don't just kind of linger and like passively click on whatever is being fed to you by your feed. Just go off and go for a walk or, read a book, a physical book. So yeah, that's that one. The second one, what was the second piece of advice?
Second one was quality over quantity.
Yeah, quality over quantity. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward one. Just in a world of limitless quantity of things you could fill your soul with, just focus on the best. Like try to, be okay with missing out. That's one thing I say a few times in the book. Is like, we live in this FOMO world of fear of missing out. Like it's okay to miss out, and it's actually better for your soul and for your wisdom to miss out on the lion's share of what's going on Twitter on any given day. Like I love going on a vacation and unplugging from social media and like gleefully missing out and being totally ignorant of everything that happened on Twitter, whatever, while I was gone. And the thing is, like, the crises that seem so important on social media in the moment, the next week everyone forgets about it anyway. So you can go to Florida on vacation like I did last week and be ignorant of all these things that were so important, quote unquote important to the people who were debating them. But by the time you get back, it's all over and everyone's moved on. So that's why like the like quality is important. Like focus on like, what are the articles or videos that like 2 months later, people are still sharing? Like, don't read 10 hot takes in your media, your daily media diet. Like read like one really high quality cold take that was written 2 months after a headline, a news event. And listen to the advice of like trusted people. That's another way you can kind of filter through in terms of the quality versus quantity. There's a few people on my social media feeds who I will almost always like pay attention to what they share. So find those people, find like the consistently quality recommendation people, and let them kind of guide you through the glut, so to speak.
Third, slow down.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a principle of wisdom in every part of life, right? We go too fast for our own good, in how we think and how we talk. And so many of us have gotten into trouble with like social media being being quick to speak instead of being slow to speak.
Yeah.
And so slowing down is good for your wisdom. And so in the way that you're processing information, processing the news, just slow down, like read the cold takes and not just the hot takes.
4, diversify your exposure.
The research is actually kind of mixed on this. Like you don't want to over diversify your social media feed to the point where you're only listening to counter, voices on the other side of you. That research is showing that actually makes you more partisan, to be kind of constantly confronted with the other side's most extreme voices. But I do think in moderation, having kind of a diversity of voices that are feeding you ideas and perspectives, and this goes beyond social media and the internet. It's also a good principle for like books, the books that you read. Don't just read books written by people just like you. In my case, like I shouldn't only read books written by white Protestant American men. Like I'm very intentional about trying to read books by women and non-Christians and people from other parts of the world. And I think that's really good for our wisdom to be, just to be giving our ears and our attention to perspectives that are different from us and that bring kind of a different ideas to the table. And it's not to say that we have to agree with all of it. You don't have to give your attention to someone's counterpoint or differing view and nod along with all of it. That would be bad. But just the practice of being exposed to and being confronted with and having to think through other arguments and other perspectives, I think is only a good thing for your wisdom.
I like that. I remember someone telling me years ago, they said, try to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And then if you can't find that, then find someone you disagree with. And you're saying, no, it's not one or the other. It's both. If you can find those other people to diversify your opinion, which is what the algorithm doesn't do. It just keeps giving you the same diet of the same stuff, reinforcing the same things.
And find the person on the other side who is actually like a good faith, conversation partner, not just the most firebrand kind of extreme voice, but the thoughtful person on the other side
that you can actually have a dialogue with. And then you said 5, share what's good.
I mean, this is a personal favorite because it's what I like to do as a cultural critic, as a film critic, music curator, creating Spotify playlists. This is what I do for my job at the Gospel Coalition. It's the best thing about social media, I find, is this. It's a great marketplace of people sharing sometimes really good things. And all of us have become aware of something that we weren't aware of before because of technology and because of social media, where people can share things. And the practice of sharing good things is part of our enjoyment of it. C.S. Lewis has this great quote, I think it's in his book, Reflections on the Psalms, where he says something to the effect of like, the completion of our enjoyment of something is actually the sharing of it. We haven't fully enjoyed the beauty of our children, for example, until we can share them, whether a photo of them or sharing them with grandparents or other people. I found that to be true as a parent. And the same is true of like a good article, a good book, a good movie. Like part of our enjoyment is actually being able to publicly endorse and share it. So if we all used the internet like less to mouth off in anger about whatever political issue, or to just share our angry opinions, and actually just to share something good that we recommend, that would edify other people. Imagine what a better place social media would be if all of us had that posture of just wanting to share what's good.
I love that. And I really do love the book, and I recommend it. Have you been surprised at how well the book is done?
Yeah, I mean, I've been pleasantly surprised. It's I think it's well timed. I think that is something that's really working for the book. I wrote the book in 2019, so before the pandemic, before COVID, before so much happened. And yet I think everything that has happened since 2020 has just underscored why it's so important to be careful about our media diets and the intakes that are coming into us. And, the pandemic, we could have a whole nother podcast conversation talking about the COVID stuff, but among other things, I think what the pandemic has done is really further destabilized our concept of truth and who do we trust and what is actually real, like what is true. We don't know if we trust the media. We don't know if we trust the government. We don't know if we trust our pastors anymore. Like there's a real crisis of trust. And so people are looking for answers. We're looking for like solid ground upon which we can build wisdom. And that's what this book is really attempting to provide, is just a framework for people in this post-truth world, in this whirlwind of information that's chaotic and we don't know what to trust. The wisdom pyramid is just one kind of rubric, one guide to help people make sense of it and to have sanity, really, like to have mental sanity and spiritual health in the midst of a fairly sickly, we're not just sick with COVID, right? We're increasingly sick spiritually because of this truth crisis that we're in. So that's what the book is addressing. So I think that's why it's doing well. It's hitting people where they're at right now.
Well, I want to say how much I enjoy the book, and I'm thankful for Crossway for sending it our way, our friends at Crossway. I do want to recommend it to other people. And how can people find out about what you're doing and online or not online? How do people follow and learn more about your ministry?
I'm always hesitant to answer that question after
writing a book on Wisdom Pyramid.
After talking about like the merits of non-online.
So write him at P.O. Box.
I do accept letters. Yeah. I have a good friend who like writes me typewritten letters just to be kind of countercultural, instead of texting me, he sends me letters.
How many a day?
But he and I are like inklings, like in another life, we would be like Lewis and Tolkien, at the Eagle and Child. But yeah, people can find me on the Gospel Coalition website. That's where I do the majority of my writing. That's my full-time job. So they can find most of my articles there. And then I'm on social media, whatever platforms you are on, you can find me. But yeah, other than that, I've written 4 books. You can learn about each of them on brettmccracken.com or Amazon. You can look me up on Amazon.
Well, awesome. Brett, I want to thank you for coming on Apollos Watered. You were a delight to have.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun.